I'm Emily Calandrelli, host of Exploration Outer Space, and you're listening to the Great Big Beautiful Podcast.
Have you ever been to Disneyland?
Affirmative.
That was definitely an e-ticket.
I can't believe all the new gadgets they've got now. For a while, we didn't even have a house phone, not to mention laser discs, high-def TV.
You are listening to the Great Big Beautiful Podcast. This week on the show.
And we're learning so much right now, and we're seeing so many wonders, and we have so much ability that as long as we are curious, as long as we do not let immediate local problems prevent us from keeping our eyes to the horizon and beyond, as long as we keep exploring, and as long as we keep hoping, I think our future is still going to be there, and it's still going to be a good one.
Here are your hosts, Jamie Green and Justin Connors.
This is the Great Big Beautiful Podcast. You can find us on Facebook, facebook.com/theGBB Podcast, and Twitter @theGBB Podcast, and anywhere you can get this podcast, that's where you can find us. Awesome. So we're excited. Jamie, last week, we're excited. We're always excited. Last week, we tried this new sound recording system for the first time, and
are you going to give them a free pitch right now?
We're in year 3. Are we in year 3 now? We're in year 3 now.
We are in year 3.
And we're finally figured out how to make it sound like we're in the same room with each other, and I'm really excited.
You guys, we're really bad at this podcasting thing. I don't understand how we're still around 3 years. I don't understand how we've gotten some of the guests we've gotten, because quite honestly, we really don't know what we're doing. You know, you see a lot of like people who like online or questions that are asked to people who have been around for a while or have popular shows, like, oh, I have this idea for a show, but I don't know how to get started, or I'm not sure what to do. Do you have any advice? And, you know, the advice is usually just do it. Just start. You buy a mic, you know, whatever one you can afford, get a good mic. You don't need fancy software, and just start doing it and putting it out there, and you'll find an audience and you'll get going. And that's kind of what we did. Like we just started doing it, and it grew into this thing that we weren't planning on from when we started, and it developed, and we still really just kind of don't know what we're doing. And we kind of make this up as we go every week.
Well, sometimes I get messages from people and they're like, so you got to tell me, what equipment do you use? How do you record? And I can imagine what they're thinking when I'm like, oh, man, we use Skype, and I have a $50 mic, and Jamie has a Yeti, and that's what we use. They're probably just like, what?
Yeah, you basically just answered any question. If anybody wants to know what our setup is, there you go. Like we are about as low tech as you could possibly be. Like we've both got mics. You know, we're not just using like a built-in laptop mic. We've both got halfway decent mics. We use Skype to connect, or Google Hangouts, or, you know, whichever is better at the time. And, you know, I've paid through Skype to have a phone number so people can call in and we can record, and we just kind of record, and Justin works on magic editing, and that's it. And we really are just figuring this out as we go. And so how do we start talking about this? Oh, that we now sound better during our intros.
Exactly. Yeah, so now we have a fancy, I won't get into the boring details, but we have a fancy internet program that lets us do it better. Anyway, Jamie, science. Hey, good segue, science. So Jamie did this week's interview solo, and so why don't you tell us about the interview and what we can expect this week?
This week I talked to Plait, who, if you don't know the name, you maybe know his moniker online. He goes by the Bad Astronomer. He's been around in internet terms. He's been around forever. He started a website, and he was like, I guess probably, I'm making this up, but he's probably one of the original Twitter handles. But he has been around, sort of demystifying astronomy and science for the mainstream, for years now. And he, you know, we've talked to quite a number of people now who this is what they do. You know, they take these complex scientific ideas and they have this gift for communication where they can translate it into words and ideas that most people who may not be able to get the the arcane scientific concepts, but they can understand. You know, we've had Neil deGrasse Tyson and we had Emily Calandrelli, and that's what they do is they take these these hardcore science concepts and theories and they translate it so you and I can understand it. And Phil does much the same thing. You know, he used to work for he worked a little bit on Hubble. We talk about that in our conversation. And he's just has this gift for taking science and astronomy and planets and planetary science and just writing these compelling articles and making arguments in defense of science, and that so people who don't necessarily have a science background can understand. This conversation, we cover a lot of ground. You know, we talk about the current state of science. We talk about Hubble. We talk about where he's currently writing and what's going on with him. We talk about SpaceX. We talk about science fiction. You know, we talk about a lot of really good stuff. And I'm going to shut up now because we had a long conversation, so I don't want to make this episode that much longer. But it's a really good one. We had a really great conversation.
Awesome. So we're going to go play that for you right now. Andreas on Twitter, this one is for you. Hope you enjoy.
Phil, thank you so much for taking the time to chat. I know every day is pretty busy for you, so I appreciate your time.
Oh, my pleasure. It's nice to be back on Geek Dad.
It's great to have you back. I need to start out, and apologies to anybody listening, but I need to start out by saying wahoo wah, and it's always nice to talk to another wahoo. So
I don't even think about myself that way anymore.
You graduate students don't tend to think of themselves as wahoos, but you know you are.
Well, plus it was years ago.
Exactly.
So, lots changed since then.
It has, and I don't know if you've been back there since. You go back now, and it looks almost exactly the same, except for a few new buildings. But if you go back to the lawn, it looks exactly the same.
I actually was back a couple of years ago to give a talk, and there are some things that are completely different.
Yeah.
But I went back to a place I used to live, and it was, pardon me. Mm-hmm. Apparently I have a wahoo stuck in my throat. I went back to a place where I lived, and it was exactly the same.
Yeah.
And that was creepy, like stepping into a time machine.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah, Charlottesville is like that. It's kind of weird. Let's quickly talk, as we're talking today, NASA is having a big announcement, so I figured we should probably at least mention that. It might be old news by the time people listen to this, but we'll still talk about it. So NASA is right now making this announcement that they found 7 Earth-like, potentially life-habitable planets surrounding a smaller star than ours, but fairly close, relatively speaking. How big is this? Like, how major is this in terms of discoveries?
Well, let me be very clear. A lot of people are saying Earth-like, and we don't know that.
Right.
All we know is that they're Earth-sized. These are 7 planets orbiting a star called TRAPPIST-1. TRAPPIST is the name of the telescope that discovered these planets. And they range in size from a little bit smaller to a little bit bigger than the Earth. And we know their orbital periods, which in turn tells us how close they are to the star. And this is a dinky little red dwarf, an incredibly faint star. But even though it's very faint, these planets are very close in. And so we can guess from their distances from the star what their temperatures are. And again, we don't know. Venus is only slightly closer to the sun than the Earth, and yet it's tremendously hotter because of its atmosphere. We don't know if these planets even have atmospheres. We don't know if they're made of dark material or light material or anything like that. So guessing their temperatures is the best we can do. But starting from those principles and saying they're probably metal and rock, we know how big they are, how close they are to their star, we can sort of kind of guesstimate their temperatures. And 3 of them fall in the range of distance from the star where, given the conditions we would expect, the surfaces would be able to sustain liquid water. We call that area from the star the habitable zone. And that's really cool. You have 3 planets like that. Now, Technically, Mars, Venus, and Earth are all in the habitable zone of the sun, and only the Earth is habitable. But you never know. Having 7 planets around one star is pretty amazing. 7 Earth-sized planets is more amazing. And the best news here is that this kind of star is among the most common in the galaxy. They vastly outnumber stars like the sun. So just statistically, we might expect to find billions of planets, hundreds of billions of planets like this in just our galaxy.
From what I understand, too, because it's such a small dwarf, relatively dim, not very hot star, that this was not something that astronomers had been necessarily looking for. Like, this was not high on the list of stars that we thought that planets would be surrounding. So this has opened up a huge door, is what you're saying.
Yes and no. I mean, originally when we started looking for planets around stars, the story's actually a little bit complicated, but we started looking around stars like the sun, a little bit hotter, a little bit cooler, but pretty much like the sun, because, you look where you think you're going to find stuff when you don't know if anything's really there yet. Once we started finding them, the search started broadening. There are actually observations that target these small stars and have found planets around them before. So this is not the first low mass, what we call a red dwarf star, with planets around it, but it is the first that has 7. We've discovered other systems with many planets before, including one that has 9 planets. So this isn't special that way either. I mean, we found multiple planets before, but you put all of these things together: low mass star, a lot of Earth-sized planets, it's close by. All of this together makes this a pretty cool discovery, and I'm really happy about it. And again, to be clear, we don't know if any of these things are habitable, nothing like that. But the other good news is that because this star is so close, 40 light years, we can use some other telescopes to observe it. And with James Webb Space Telescope launching in 2018, this gigantic infrared telescope, which is going to go out into space and kind of be even more powerful than Hubble in many ways, that's going to be a big deal. That'll be able to maybe detect atmospheres around some of these planets, if any of them have them. Mm-hmm. So that is
exciting.
We're going to start characterizing the physical characteristics of these planets.
Yeah. One of the things that kind of caught my attention as I was just reading the initial reports coming out of the press conference was that if you were to stand on, because they're all so relatively close to one another, that if you were to stand on the surface of one of them, you would be able to see all of the others at some point in the sky, and they would all be about moon size or a little bit smaller. So you'd be able to see the other planets. But because they're all, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, they're all as close to their sun as Mercury is to ours, even though that star is much smaller, how big would that sun be in the sky if you were standing on the surface of one of those planets?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. I mean, that's something you'd have to calculate.
Yeah.
On the other hand, this is the kind of thing you can do really quickly. The star is about pardon me, I'm sorry, I'll have to edit that. That's a good question. I haven't actually done the calculation, but it's the kind of thing you can kind of sort of do in your head. The star is a little bit less than 1/10 as wide as the sun, and these planets are just a few million kilometers from the star itself, which means they're 50, 75 times closer than the Earth is. So the star would actually, from the ones that are close in, would be a lot bigger than the sun.
Yeah.
These planets are all orbiting much, much, much closer than Mercury orbits the sun. Even the most distant one, they're named by letters: TRAPPIST 1, B, C, D, E, F, G, and H. H is the farthest one out, and it's still only about, I think, 5 million miles or something like that from the star. So even from the farthest one, the star is going to look bigger than the sun does from Earth. But the star is so much dimmer, it's not putting out nearly as much heat. So that planet might be too cold for life as we know it.
Yeah.
But since we've started discovering these planets, we've also learned that you don't have to have a lot of sunlight. The surface doesn't have to be warm for there to be liquid water. We've got moons around Saturn and Jupiter, as well as probably Uranus and Neptune, that are icy moons that have oceans of water under their surface and may very well have life. And these are way past where we would think you could have liquid water, at least the way we used to think of it. Now we understand that nature is more clever than we are. We're always kind of lagging behind, making discoveries, finding out what it's doing, sneaking stuff past us. And so in this case, you never know. I mean, all of these planets could be habitable in one way or another. But, at a distance of 400 trillion kilometers, it's going to take us a long time to get there. That's a long way.
Exciting stuff for the future. For the next few years, though, as we train our telescopes on those planets and that star, sure, definitely something I'm going to be following closely.
Yeah, me too. It's pretty interesting, and it's the follow-ups that I'm excited about. What we'll be detecting on these planets over the next few years using different telescopes.
Absolutely. So let's shift gears away from current, breaking news. So obviously we're on Geek Dad, so let's talk a little bit about something that hits a little bit close to home. So my kids right now are super into science and astronomy as much as it's possible for a 5 and 8 year old to be. And I really want to get them a telescope, and they love looking at the night sky. I really want to get them a telescope so they can sort of explore and make their own discoveries, but I kind of don't know what I'm doing with it. So I'm wondering what advice you would have for other parents who are just similarly befuddled. They really want to get their kids into it, but they're kind of confounded with the options and what they need to do to make that happen.
Right. That is a really good question. It's a very common question. And I will say this, getting a telescope is difficult. It's not like going out and buying, just something off the shelf, like a shirt. It's more like buying a car. What you buy depends on a lot of stuff. Like, do you want to look at the moon and nearby planets, or do you want to look at really faint, difficult to observe objects? Are you just starting out? How's your back? Do you have a strong back? If your back's like mine, you don't want a big telescope because you can't lift it. The best telescope is the one you use. Yep. So there's always going to be compromises. The prices go up really quickly too. So what I tell people is, if you have somebody, especially kids, interested in astronomy, the thing to do first is to get a pair of binoculars. You can find a good pair you can find a decent pair for $100 or less. You can find starting to get pretty good quality binoculars in the $200 range. And then you can look at the moon. Right now, as we're talking, Venus is setting after the sun. It's up fairly high in the southwest sky. And with even a small pair of binoculars, you can see that it's a crescent. That doesn't happen too often. It has to be between us and the sun. And because of the geometry, it actually passes the Earth relatively quickly. So it only does this for a couple of weeks out of every orbit. But right now, literally, it's a good time to look at Venus. Jupiter, you can see its moons. You can usually see a little bit of the belts that go across it. You can see Saturn's rings. Now, mind you, this is just with binoculars. You're not going to get a great view, but you're going to see them. And then, if the interest lasts, especially with kids, there are inexpensive small telescopes you can get. One of my favorites to recommend is a group called Astronomers Without Borders. Right? They're like Doctors Without Borders. Right. This is a really great group of people. They go to countries where there's sort of an underserved population. Sometimes these are war-torn places, or they're just poverty-stricken, or whatever. And they go there with their telescopes and show people the sky. They're doing wonderful work. It's a nonprofit, and they partnered with Celestron, a telescope maker, to make a telescope called the One Sky, and it's $200. So it's really not much more than a pair of binoculars. It's got a small mirror, but it's a tabletop telescope. It sets up in a matter of a minute once you've got it put together, which is not hard. And I have one. I've been using it, and it's wonderful. Look at the moon, look at Venus, stuff like that. So it's sort of a grab and go.
Yeah.
And then finally, to end this, if you go to slate.com, which was my old website, back in December of 2015, I wrote a frequently asked questions list, basically, a telescope buying guide. So if you type in Plait telescope FAQ into Google, I figure you'll find it.
You'll find it. And we'll link to it. I'll find it and link to it, too.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you.
What's your elevator pitch in support of funding space exploration, since that's apparently still in doubt?
An elevator pitch, that's a tough one because there's things to do. And it depends on who you're talking to. If you're talking to somebody who might be in power now, I would say, listen, when you invest in space exploration, when you invest in science, your return on investment is anywhere between a factor of 3 and 20. That's just for space exploration. So for every dollar you invest in the space program, you get $3 to $20 back over time. And you don't know what it's going to be. You don't know if it's going to be that probe to Jupiter or building Hubble or whatever. But overall, investing in NASA, investing in the National Science Foundation, and those groups makes you more money even than investing in funding, in like, your IRA or something like that. So we should be doing this. If you're talking to somebody who's a little more idealistic, it's in some ways it's easier, in some ways it's harder. And you can say, listen, this is what we do. We are curious animals. We want to understand what's going on around us. And by exploring the world around us, we learn about this kind of stuff. And hey, you know what? We find out that there are existential threats to our species. The ozone hole that was discovered a few decades ago, that was a big deal. The ozone layer over the Earth protects us from ultraviolet radiation from the sun. Very dangerous to lose that. That means more skin cancers, die-offs of plant life that moves up the food chain. We detected that. We figured out what to do about it. There was legislation that was passed by the Reagan administration, and now the ozone hole is on the rebound. It's getting better. We actually did that to ourselves. It was our own carbon fluorocarbon, CFCs, in propellants like hairspray and stuff like that, going up into the atmosphere and destroying the ozone. Science discovered the problem, and then legislation fixed it. And we know that there are other things that can happen. Asteroid impacts, climate change, if you understand that climate change is real. We need to be exploring this stuff so that we can understand these threats and fix them.
Yeah.
Hope it's a long elevator ride. That was about 20 floors.
That was okay.
I could probably be brief. I need to practice that.
That's okay. Sometimes you can't be brief. Sometimes you need to just 100%. Corner people and convince them. So you, over the years, you've made a name for yourself by writing about pseudoscience and correcting misconceptions and talking about bad astronomy that we see, around us in popular culture and elsewhere. How frustrating, though, is it for you that there's still such a need to correct these misconceptions and that there's still just such a general ignorance of science among people in general?
That's a little bit of a tough question, because you just know that they're going to be the same things over and over and over again. And you kind of get not inured to it. You get used to it, at least. It's just one of these things where you see it over and over again. And sometimes you just have to shake your head and go, yeah, still people who think the moon landing's faked. Flat Earth people seem to pop up every now and again, and I get a flood of tweets and emails. Are you going to talk to this guy? It's like, why would I talk to that guy? This person thinks the Earth is flat. That is such a ridiculous idea that it is used as a standard phrase for ridiculous ideas. Mm-hmm. Thinking that climate change isn't real is like thinking the Earth is flat. And so I'm not going to waste my time talking to folks like that. That's more of a religious belief than anything they've talked themselves into because of analyzing stuff critically. There's also new stuff that comes along that makes me want to bang my head against the desk because it just seems so silly. And there are people who claim every asteroid that passes this is going to hit us. There's this zero gravity day, which started as a joke, literally an April Fool's prank that people think really happens, that on a certain day of the year, you can jump up and the gravity of Jupiter and Pluto will balance the Earth and you'll float. No. And there are people who really believe that. It comes up every year. And like I said, it was literally a joke hoax by an astronomer decades ago. So, that stuff comes around, you're just like, oh, God. But then there are the ones that are serious. If somebody wants to think the Earth is flat, fine. You know what? They'll never understand time zones, and that's fine. But when somebody says, I don't think climate change is real, and that somebody is the president of the United States, that somebody is the chairman of the House Science, Space, and Technology Committee, when that person is a powerful senator, or, in fact, dozens of senators and Congress critters now, and all of the cabinet appointees that Trump has put in. That's terrifying, because this is, no kidding, an existential threat to humanity. We are already seeing the effects of this. We've known about the effects of this. Carbon dioxide levels are going up. Temperatures are going up. We're seeing more extreme weather, ocean acidification, sea level is rising. I mean, every single thing you can think of that you would expect from climate change is happening from global warming. And yet these people have their heads stuck in the increasingly heated up sand. And they're refusing to, not only are they refusing to legislate about it, they're legislating against it, preventing scientists from doing the work they want to do. And that, to me, is terrifying. That is the real threat of anti-science and uncritical thinking.
So, so it's 2017. We're still debating some of these most basic and fundamental aspects of science that we've known for centuries. And like you said, this skepticism, this denial of science it's taking hold not just in the general public, but among our administration. I mean, what gives you the strength to carry on in the face of all of that, what must be incredibly depressing news for somebody who's devoted his life to it?
Well, since January 20th of this year, that's been a much tougher slog.
I can imagine.
It's just stunning, the breadth of not just anti-science, but just anti-reality.
Yeah.
Just statements that are fly in the face of the evidence that we have, clear evidence. And you show this to the president, and he just lies about it on TV. It's stunning. It's different than the usual sort of presidential dodges of truth or secrecy. Every president has secrets that they don't want out, because that's just national security, and I get that. But to keep saying, the biggest electoral college win in history, and it's like, no, not even in the past two elections.
Yeah.
And it's just and to deny just this evidence, somebody closing their eyes and sticking their fingers in their ears and going la 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 la, what do you do about that? And the answer is, well, you know what? There's not a whole lot you can do directly, but senators and representatives, for those of us in America, they bow to pressure. If you pressure them enough, if you make the phone calls, you send the faxes, you go to the town hall meetings, you go to the offices of your local reps. When hundreds or thousands of people in their districts or their states contact them, they can listen. Now, we're hearing right now of a lot of them running away, literally trying to escape out of back rooms to get away from town hall meetings that have turned against them. Those people are cowards. Those are what we might term assholes. These are bad people. They are our elected representatives, and they are fleeing from their constituents because they can't face the truth. So what we need to do is rally ourselves, go on marches, make our voices heard, and then in 2018, vote those bastards out the door.
Hear, hear. Tell us how
Sorry,
you really think.
Am I being clear enough? Am I getting my point across there? And a lot of people say I'm partisan, and I'm like, you know what? I am not partisan. It is the GOP that made these partisan issues. Climate change was never a partisan issue.
It should not be a partisan issue.
And it shouldn't be. It's just fact. But when it goes against political ideology, that's when it becomes partisan.
Yeah.
And so, a lot of people want to say that people who are anti-vax, against vaccinations, that's more of a liberal than a conservative thing. And it turns out, no, it's not. That crosses all party lines, and we have evidence of this now because Trump is wooing anti-vaxxers at the moment.
Yep.
So that's all over the place. A lot of liberals don't like it because there are chemicals in it, and a lot of conservatives don't like it because it's big government trying to tell you how to stay healthy. But this is a marriage made in hell, and the people who are going to suffer are little kids who need their vaccinations to keep them from getting preventable diseases. So that sort of thing crosses the aisle very easily. But most of this stuff is heavily partisan. And you know what? I don't give a damn if it's partisan. If your representative is a Democrat or your representative is a Republican, and they're saying stuff that goes against what we know to be true and is in fact a threat, kick them to the curb. Yeah. Get rid of them.
So with staring down the next 4 years and this, what's becoming a black hole of ignorance, have you found a silver lining? Like, have you found something that says, well, at least there's this?
No.
Or is it too soon? Still too soon?
No. It's the good news comes when the fights work. When you see hundreds of thousands of people marching.
Yeah.
When you see enough people getting together protesting the anti-science trending that we're seeing and planning a big march, for example, on Washington and other cities spontaneously picking this up. When you see individuals, heroes, really, standing up against this. Sally Yates, for example, who basically said this immigration ban is illegal, and she got fired for it. But a lot of these individual people can make things happen. The ACLU is out there fighting the good fight, and then you know what? We keep raising a ruckus, and stuff shakes out. Yeah. So right now things may look bleak, but I think what we'll find is that as we put the pressure on more and more of these Congress people, senators, representatives, the president, we will find more and more weaknesses, more and more places where we can dig in. And hopefully in the next couple of years, we can minimize their impact. And then in the midterm elections, kick the bums out.
You mentioned the science.
That's my hope.
You mentioned the science march. Are you going to one?
Sadly, that is being scheduled at exactly the same time as the Silicon Valley Comic-Con.
Oh.
The announcement for the march had not been made when I accepted going to the Comic-Con. So what I'm hoping to do is while I'm in San Jose for that week, maybe there will be something there I can do while I'm there.
Yeah.
I think, it's a Comic-Con and I'm there to promote science. I'll be giving a talk and there's some other...
Organize one for inside the con.
Yeah, maybe there's something we can do and figure it out. It's in April.
Yeah.
So there's still plenty of time. I'll figure that out.
Yeah. I watched your TED Talk from a few years ago now. And in it was I think meant to be slightly tongue-in-cheek, but it was a serious line. You said that the difference between us and the dinosaurs is that we have a space program and we can vote. Are you still that optimistic?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's still true.
Yeah.
Nothing's necessarily changed. The real problem is that nothing there has necessarily changed. We're still not that much farther along with this than we have been for the past few years. NASA just picked a couple of missions for follow-up space missions to investigate asteroids, actually. But one of the ones that they only kind of sort of said okay to was one to actually look for asteroids that pass near the Earth. They didn't cancel it, but they didn't pick it either. So it's sort of in an extended exploratory stage right now. Yeah. And there was another privately funded mission. I'm actually not sure where that stands right now. The B612 Foundation has something called Sentinel. And they've been having difficulty finding funding, I believe. I'm not sure about that. Don't quote me. But, we still have telescopes looking for these things. We are still building telescopes to look for near-Earth asteroids or comets that can hit us. But I don't think a lot of progress has been made in what to do about it.
Yeah.
We need to have an actual mission built so that we can test it and smash into an asteroid that's otherwise safe, so that we can see that we can do this if we need to. I don't want to be testing previously untested hardware and software on an asteroid that's actually headed for Earth. I'd rather make sure we can do this first, so that when one does have our name on it, we'll be a little bit more confident we can push it out of the way.
You mentioned telescopes. I know you used to work on the Hubble, and I've been a few times now to Goddard here in DC to see the development of the Webb, and it's gorgeous to look at. It is one
piece
thing.
of art.
It's just a beautiful machine. But I was wondering if you could quickly tell us how different those two will be, really, in terms of somebody, the general public who isn't really tuned into the science. What are they going to notice about the images that are returning and the information that we get back?
The difference, the main difference between the two, is that Hubble is designed to look at the kind of light that we see, what we call visible light, as well as just outside of the human range of vision, in the infrared and the ultraviolet, just barely. And it's also a relatively small telescope. The mirror is about 2.5 meters, 8 feet wide. James Webb Space Telescope, however, is actually tuned to look in the far infrared, much outside of what our eyes can see. So it's going to, while it can see the same sorts of objects Hubble does, galaxies, planets, and that sort of thing, it sees them differently and in many cases better. It can see, for example, warm dust, which is basically grains of soot and small dust grains that litter galaxies and are created when stars explode. And they trace where stars form. So that's JWST is going to see that a lot better than Hubble. It'll be able to look at asteroids and characterize them much better because asteroids are warm objects and emit infrared light. They reflect visible light, but because they emit infrared, they're brighter in that part of the spectrum. JWST will be able to see them better. Planets orbiting nearby stars. Stars put out a tremendous amount of visible light, and planets don't reflect much of it. A star can be 1 billion times brighter than a planet next to it. But in the infrared, stars aren't as bright. And so that drops from 1 billion to a factor of hundreds of thousands. And that still sounds like a lot. But we have techniques that make that even better. And so you build a telescope and you can observe these planets a lot more easily than you can in visible light. And of course, the other thing is that JWST's mirror, James Webb Space Telescope's mirror, is much larger. It's 6.5 meters, over 20 feet wide. And it's actually a series of 18 hexagonal mirrors, each a little over 1 meter wide, that fit together like a flower petal. And it's gonna launch with them all closed together. It's gonna go out into space and then open up like a flower in the morning, and be able to see all these amazing things. So they're similar in that they're looking at a lot of the same objects, but they're different in what they are going to do. And the important thing is that for a while, at least, they're both going to be up observing at the same time, which means we'll have really good coverage of a lot of really interesting objects. And it's when the images come back, it's going to be amazing. The pictures of galaxies and nebulae and everything are going to be spectacular, even more so, I think, than what we've seen from Hubble.
Which is kind of unbelievable. Just seeing some of the images we've gotten from Hubble, it's like, how can we get anything really better than that, or more mind-blowing, really?
Well, people forget. I mean, I worked on Hubble before it launched, barely. And I started my PhD work on it literally when it launched, and then continued to work with it for 10 years. And it had been upgraded several times. It's orbiting the Earth, and we were able to send a space shuttle up there with astronauts to replace cameras and upgrade the technology. You won't be able to do that with JWST. It's going to be too far away. But over the 27 years now, Hubble's been in orbit. Because of the upgrades in cameras and because of our better computers and techniques, the images we get from Hubble now are so much better than they were back in 1991, 1992, that it's almost a completely different telescope. And JWST is going to be another step ahead than that. So it's going to be ridiculous when we start getting images back from it.
Is that a limitation of it, though? I mean, like you said, we've been able to go up to Hubble and change things out and update it and fix it when things go awry. But Webb is going to be, 1 million miles away, and we're not going to be able to just fly a mission out there to fix it. So, I mean, if something goes wrong, we're kind of SOL. I mean, is how much of a limitation is that really?
Well, you hope it's not.
Okay.
You kind of hope it's going to work. It's a sophisticated telescope. I mean, we've built telescopes that open up in space, and a lot of the technology that's going into this is been tested on other missions in the past. But altogether like this on this scale, it's unclear, and hopefully it'll work. If it doesn't, that's going to be bad. Hopefully. Look, when they launched Hubble, it had a mirror in it with a flaw that wouldn't allow it to focus correctly. It was just a dumb mistake. And for several years, we got fuzzy images. But I have to say they were better than what you could do from the ground. But for what we were hoping, it wasn't as good. And then they went up and fixed it. They replaced a lot of the hardware in it and made it better. With JWST, we can't do that. So you kind of hope it's going to work. Or if it doesn't work in some way, it's not going to cripple the mission. We've got, for example, there's a Juno spacecraft. It's the Juno spacecraft orbiting Jupiter right now.
Yeah.
And it's returning phenomenal science, including amazing images, on this really weird, almost 2-month-long looping orbit around Jupiter. It was supposed to orbit Jupiter like that twice and then fire its engines and drop down into a much tighter orbit around the planet. But a couple of stuck valves have prevented it from doing that. And so the science we're getting back from it isn't quite what we wanted, but the engineers back here have said, you know what, we just can't be sure we can fix these valves. And if we try to fire the engine, things could go catastrophically wrong. So you know what? We're good. Yeah. Leave it in this orbit, get the science we can, and we'll be happy. And so you kind of, if you're going to have a failure on a mission, you hope it's that kind of failure where you can still do a lot of good work.
But that Juno mission was extended beyond what it was supposed to have been, right? Aren't we already into extra time, even if it's not as robust as they wanted?
A lot of missions have sort of a baseline mission, and then it gets extended. You know what? I don't think that's true for Juno. I don't know. Yeah. But when you look at something like the rovers on Mars, Opportunity and Spirit, although Spirit's not working anymore, and Curiosity. Opportunity is still working. I can't even remember when that thing was launched. It's been up there for like well over a decade. And it was only supposed to last for 3 months. So it's been extended over and over again. Cassini orbiting Saturn has been extended over and over again. You know, if you're going to spend $2-3 billion or more on a mission, most of that is just building it and getting it to where it's supposed to go. It's relatively cheap to keep it running. So yeah, keep it running as long as you can get science out of it until the fuel runs out, like Cassini is running out of fuel. And once that happens, they're going to drop it into Saturn itself. They're going to let it burn up in the atmosphere. For 2 reasons. One is that you don't want it smacking into a moon and possibly contaminating that moon with our bacteria. But the other one is you can get more science out of it that you couldn't get otherwise. We're going to be beaming back data as this thing plunges through Saturn's atmosphere. And that's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. So take it.
Definitely. Realistically, you mentioned, the presence of liquid water farther out in our own solar system than we originally thought possible. But realistically, what are the odds that life exists on Europa, which is sort of the one moon that everybody points to as having the highest potential?
I would say it's between 0 and 100%. I mean, you can't know. I mean, before we even knew there was water on Europa or under Europa or any of these moons, you would have said 0, especially for Europa. Europa is orbiting Jupiter, which has very strong radiation fields around it due to its intense magnetic field. And so if you were to stand on the surface of Europa, you'd die. And not just because it's cold and has no air. The radiation, you'd get a lethal dose of radiation relatively quickly. But ice, it turns out, is a really good shield against that kind of radioactivity. And the ice shell on Europa could be several kilometers thick. So if there's an ocean under there, and we know there is, it's protected from that radiation. But the ice on the surface and the water under the surface can talk to each other. There are cracks in the ice, and so that water bubbles up, and then some of that material gets hit by Jupiter's radiation field that basically tears apart the molecules, and they rebuild themselves. And you can get complex organic molecules that are then basically swept back down into the ocean. And we also think that Europa might have a rocky core. If that's the case, it's possible that ocean is salty. You get minerals in the core that then mix with the water, and you get salt water. And it could have tectonic activity in the core that's venting materials into that ocean, like the black smokers you find on the bottom of the Earth's oceans. And life thrives there on Earth. So, I would not bet against there being life on Europa. I wouldn't be surprised if we find it, but I would certainly be very, very, very happy.
Yeah. God,
and not just Europa. Enceladus, a moon of Saturn, Dione, Tethys, these are all icy moons. Pluto's, what is it, 5 billion kilometers from the sun? And there's really good evidence that it has at least some liquid water under the surface.
That just boggles my mind. Like, I don't understand that at all.
That really shocked me. I wasn't expecting that at all. I thought it would be too small, it'd be frozen solid.
Yeah.
But apparently there's some source of heat in the core, maybe radioactive elements. And because the surface, the only way to explain a lot of features we see on the surface of Pluto that were returned by the New Horizons mission is there being, if not liquid, at least slushy ice under the surface.
All right.
It's very weird.
It is very. Well, it's exciting too. I mean, people. I mean,
you think?
Well, the thing is, like, especially now with politics overwhelming everything, it's so easy to say, like, oh, what a terrible time. It's so frustrating. It's so disheartening and dispiriting. And while that's true, it's also such an exciting time with respect to other things. When you talk about medicine and healthcare and science, space exploration, and just the general state of science, like, there's never been a more exciting time to be alive.
Honestly, I think that's true. And it's a lot better than we tend to think. Yes, there's a lot of proximate issues with the government, stepping on the throat of progress right now. But globally, we're seeing a lot of really good stuff. Poverty's down, crime is down. A lot of bad indicators are down. A lot of good indicators are up. This, I'm hoping, is going to be a temporary hiccup because our technology and our ability to use that technology, and not just that, but our understanding of the universe, such that we can create this technology or use it to even better understand the universe better. And I use better in there twice on purpose. We've never seen anything like this before, I think, in the history of humanity. And we're learning so much right now, and we're seeing so many wonders, and we have so much ability that as long as we are curious, as long as we do not let immediate local problems prevent us from keeping our eyes to the horizon and beyond, as long as we keep exploring and as long as we keep hoping, I think our future is still going to be there, and it's still going to be a good one.
We've got a few more minutes, and I want to ask about more optimistic things because I feel like we've dwelled too much on the negative.
Sure. I get it. Yeah, it's easy right now.
It is way too easy right now. One of them, this might not even have a positive, optimistic answer, but I'm just curious what your thoughts are. Knowing what you know about people, how do you think first contact would ultimately go down? Like, how would Earth react if a ship just appeared in our atmosphere?
Well, I think it's unlikely for a ship just to appear in our atmosphere. There's a lot of first contact scenarios, and the spaceship landing on the White House lawn is a good one. It's a fun one, but there are two things going against that. One is that space is really big, which the joke is that's why we call it space. Yeah. And as far as we know, you can't go faster than the speed of light, which means that even a trip to the nearest star would take at least 4 years. And our galaxy is 100,000 light years across. So getting here from another planet is a lot of work. It takes a huge amount of energy and a lot of time to get here. Now, who knows what aliens are like? Maybe they have lifespans of 10,000 years, whatever. But assuming that that's unlikely, it's a hell of a lot easier to talk across these vast distances using, for example, radio waves. Radio waves are easy to make. You don't need a sophisticated technology compared to what we have now to do it. We've had radio telescopes for close to 100 years now. And you can, and the ability to find habitable planets also isn't as hard as you might think. We only invented the telescopes something like 400 years ago, and here we are finding planets around other stars. It won't be that much longer before a lot of these planets we find we can characterize. We'll have big telescopes, we'll be able to look at their atmospheres, and we'll find one that's the right size and temperature and has the signature of oxygen in its atmosphere. Oxygen is very reactive. You wouldn't expect to see oxygen unless that is an indicator of life. And so that's where you might want to send your radio signals. And you could easily build a radio telescope or an array in space that could target a few thousand stars and send messages to them every day or something like that. That's sort of the principle of Contact, the book, the movie. These aliens build a gigantic radio telescope which listens for radio waves from civilizations like us, and when it hears them, it sends it back with a message buried in it. That's all I'm gonna say about that. If you haven't read the book, go read the book. It's an amazing book. And so it strikes me that is most likely. There is one other scenario, and that is Seth Shostak, who was an astronomer with the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence and an old friend of mine. He's posited that if you build machines, you can put those on rockets and send them to other stars, and they'll last for a million years. Who cares? They're dormant until they get to a star system, and then they can find an asteroid, replicate themselves or whatever, and then launch themselves off to more stars. And so in a sense, it's like a virus. You can send out 100 of these from your home planet, and each one of those hundreds will make hundreds more. And you can actually explore the entire galaxy in a relatively short amount of time, a few million years. I know a few million years is not short, but the galaxy's billions of years old. We've had life on Earth for billions of years. So that's a drop in the bucket compared to the age of the galaxy. So it's kind of surprising we haven't been contacted by things like that now. It's maybe an indication that we're the first. But either way, he thinks that's the most likely scenario, is that we may get a ship passing through our solar system or even landing, but it won't be aliens. It'll be their robots. That's an interesting speculation.
That really is. Now my mind is just running crazy with that idea of a ship of viral robots expanding out throughout the universe.
Yeah, and it's not ridiculous. It's not, oh, that's just dumb. No, Not at all. It's solid. It makes perfect sense. None of this is outside the realm of the sort of technology we can either build or imagine building in the next few decades.
So along those same lines, though, when you think about science fiction and all the tech that's available, that's just made up out of thin air for sci-fi shows or movies or books or whatever, what do you think? What piece of sci-fi tech would fundamentally change humanity for the better? Like, what do we need to invent to basically save ourselves?
To save ourselves, how?
Well, I mean,
a lot of different ways we're in trouble.
Name your trouble, and then what one piece, if we could only invent one piece of sci-fi technology, whether it's possible or even plausible or at all, what would solve the most problems with that one invention?
Easy. Fusion power.
Wow.
With fusion, fusion is a type of energy generation that the stars use. You're fusing hydrogen into helium or low mass elements into higher mass elements. Stars do this. It's what nuclear bombs do as well, thermonuclear weapons. You get a huge amount of energy out of a very small amount of mass. That's super important because right now we're getting most of our energy from burning coal, which you get not much energy out of a lot of mass. It's very inefficient. Fusion would be able to generate that much energy much more easily. Not only that, but rockets work by basically heating up a gas and throwing it out the back of the rocket. In Newton's third law, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. You throw something out the back of the rocket moves forward. The hotter you can get a gas, the faster it expands and blows out the back end, the faster your rocket can go. If you can use fusion power to heat up a gas, you can heat it up tremendously hot, and you get much more efficient rocket drives. And if we could build a fusion reactor and put it on a rocket, you could get to the moon in hours. You could get to Mars in days. And you could actually get to the nearest stars in just a few years instead of a few tens of thousands of years. It would open up clean energy on the Earth. It would reduce global warming by a huge amount, and it would literally open up the planets and the stars. So yeah, I would say fusion power. How about that?
That's a good answer.
It's the good answer. As a matter of fact, I think it is the answer to your question.
It is the answer? Okay.
Anybody who says something else is probably wrong. Unless you're worried about, pandemics, and then, that's not going to help as much.
Okay. Finally, because I know we're running out of time. Despite the current political climate, despite all of the, negative things that we've talked about, when you think about the current state of science and where we're going and what's on just over the next horizon, realistically, what has you the most excited?
Golly, that's a good question. The technology right now that is exciting, but not in an oh my God kind of way, is how much better we're getting at things like solar power and alternative energies. That's very exciting because that is technology that can really help mitigate climate change right now. That's a slow process, and so it's not like you wake up and go, wow, oh, look at this. It takes time. But we're at the point now where generating power from solar panels is on an even footing with fossil fuels. And you hear a lot of people saying, oh, but we're subsidizing solar energy through the government. It's like, what do you think we're doing to the fossil fuel companies? My God, the taxes those guys are paying is not really much compared to what they're doing. And so, on an even footing, I mean, kilowatt hours per or dollars per kilowatt hour, and they're about equal right now. So that's good. But if you're talking about a breakthrough technology, I love what's going on in astronomy right now. We're building bigger telescopes with more sophisticated technology. We're able to better investigate the universe around us. We didn't know about planets orbiting other stars until 1992, and we didn't know about planets orbiting stars like the sun until 3 years later. And now we know of thousands. So the technology to be able to discover even more of these and to actually look at these planets and know more about them than just, they exist, which is in many cases about all we know. To be able to look at them and say, this planet has a surface temperature of this, it's got a chemical composition of that, there's, it's an atmosphere of mostly nitrogen and some oxygen. That sort of thing is something I'm sitting on the edge of my seat waiting for, and that's only a few years away.
Again, I said it before. It's such an exciting time. Like
yeah,
it's impossible to predict almost sometimes. Like what's going to be the next great discovery and like where we're headed in those next few years. It really is exciting.
Yeah, I agree.
Phil, thank you so much for your time. This has just been amazing. I wish we could have you back and go over the other half of the questions that I didn't get a chance to ask.
Well, thank you. It's my pleasure. And just give me a ring.
I love these guys like Neil deGrasse Tyson, Emily Calandrelli, and Phil Plait because I am the person that they're explaining it for. I'm the layman that needs science explained. And it's really great that they're doing what they do because it can be overwhelming if you don't think you know what they're talking about or you can't understand the science terms. It can be really overwhelming, especially if you want to know. So it's really great. I love it.
Yeah, for sure. And the problem is that, people who might not have that scientific background or, like you were saying, like, I want to know, but I don't even know how to ask the questions or it shuts you down. Like if you hear a conversation or if you read a conversation, it's like you're less likely to become involved in that conversation or ask the questions that you want to have answered because you think like, oh, they're just going to laugh at me because I don't understand.
Yeah. No, exactly. That's how I feel in a lot of situations, even on this podcast when I'm talking to super creative people. I'm just like, I have no idea, man. You're the expert.
What's that? What's the phrase? You know what? My motto is that phrase: "Fake it till you make it."
Exactly.
I still haven't made it, but I'm getting really good at faking it.
I agree with you. Everything I do creatively, that's the way it is.
All right. That's exactly right.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for listening this week. Find us on Facebook and Twitter at the GBB Podcast. Let's keep the conversation going there. Let us know what you thought of this week's show. And I'm Justin at 140 Justin C.
I'm Jamie at the Roarbots.
And we will see you next time right here on the Great Big Beautiful Podcast.
This podcast has been a production of the Geek Dad Podcast Network. If you've enjoyed this content, please consider supporting us at patreon.com/geekdad.
Take care.
I love this new recording software too because I can do things like this. Did it make that sound effect in your ear?
No, I didn't hear anything.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, you're going to hear it when I record.
Oh, okay.
There we go.
What was
it? It's do-do-do-do-do-do. It's like a ballpark sound effect, and there's also one where I could go when we tell jokes.
No, I can't hear it.
It's going to be on the recording.